is Frederick, F-R-E-D-E-R-I-C-K. Last name is Barnum, B-A-R-N-U-M.
Okay. Before we get into the interview questions, I just have a few preliminary questions for you. Can you tell me what dates you worked for RCA?
Yes, I started with RCA in 1984, and only 2 years later the company was purchased by General Electric Company. So I actually stayed on with General Electric and successor companies, and I'm still with the successor company today known as L3 Communications as of 2010.
Okay, great. And what was your job title at RCA?
I started there as a business development manager in the marketing group.
Okay. And before we begin with the interview questions, can you tell me a little bit about your book?
Yes, when I first started there in 1984, I was fascinated by the company's history. I started to learn from some of the senior people there about all the wonderful things that had been invented there over the years. And so I started to do research and collecting archives and collecting files from people as they retired, which eventually led to my writing and publishing a book in 1991 for the company. It's called His Master's Voice in America. And at that time it was the 90-year story of the company's history, dating all the way back to the Victor Talking Machine Company's incorporation in 1901. I published the book just once in 91. 5,000 copies of the book were made, and they were sold mainly to the existing employees and the retirees, but it was offered for sale on the open market as well. It sold out in a matter of months. And then I went back to my regular job as a business development manager, and today this book is considered to be a collector's item by folks that love histories of phonograph and radio and television and anybody that was associated with RCA.
Great. How did you get your job at RCA?
Well, first of all, I went to college at Georgetown University in Washington. I graduated there in 1979. I had also been in the ROTC program there, so when I graduated I was also commissioned as a second lieutenant. And so I entered the Army, and I did 5 years in the Army as an intelligence officer because my degree was in the Russian language and I was a linguist in the Army. 3 of those 5 years I spent in Germany, and upon finishing the tour in Germany I came home, I got off active duty, and I went looking for a job. And one of the things I did when I was in Germany was I worked with defense contractors in fielding of new equipment for our unit over there. So I learned a little bit about the aerospace industry, so when I got home I went interviewing with aerospace contractors, and RCA in Camden offered me a job.
Can you describe what you did at RCA?
Yes. It's funny because when I went down for the interview, they, I guess, assumed that I was an engineer. And I went through this full day of interviews with about 5 different guys that were all engineers. And it was only the last of the 5 guys that actually asked me the question, what is my degree in? So I told him Russian language, and he thought that was pretty funny because everybody thought I was an engineer. So he said, I'm going to walk you across the street back to the building we started in, and I thought he was going to say, thank you, take care, we'll see you later. And instead he took me up to the floor where the marketing department was, and he said to me, I'm going to introduce you to a man. When you walk into his office, I want you to say something in Russian. So I didn't know what he was doing here, but I went with it, and we walked into this man's office, and I said a few words in Russian. He immediately spoke back to me in Russian. Turns out that this man had been the Eastern European regional manager for the RCA's commercial broadcast group before he was in the job that I met him in. And we hit it off immediately, and he liked my personality, and he said, why don't you come back and talk to this other guy that works with me, and which I did. And turns out the guy I came back to talk to the second time was in RCA's business of doing work with the intelligence community, which was a perfect fit for me because that's the community I had just come out of in the Army, and the man hired me on the second interview. So I was pretty excited.
What kind of wages and benefits did you earn at RCA?
Well, let's see, this was back in 1984. I had just come out of the military. I was making a whopping $23,000, I believe, which was considered decent money at that point. And when they made me the offer at RCA, I almost fell out of my chair when I saw the letter saying they were offering me $32,500 a year. So I immediately jumped on it and took the job. And the benefits were just it was a very full package of benefits. Medical, dental, insurance, life insurance, and a pension plan, and a 401k.
What were your relationships with your coworkers like?
Oh, I gotta say that the thing that first struck me about starting there was the friendliness of all the people there. They would always refer to RCA locations as RCA Family. They even had their own internal company magazine called RCA Family, a very family-oriented business. The people there were just tremendous. I can't think of a bad thing I can say about anybody that I worked with there. They welcomed me on day one when I started there with open arms, and everybody from the janitors to the senior management were just very, very nice people. So it was a very enjoyable experience.
Were there a variety of ethnic groups when you worked at RCA?
I'm going to say this. There were ethnic groups, but they were mainly white ethnic groups when I started there. It was not very diverse as far as African Americans or Hispanic in that sense, but there were very big populations of Italian, Irish, and Jewish that I noticed. Matter of fact, we had a company telephone directory that if you opened up to a certain page, you could actually see like a list of the same name, same last name going halfway down a page. I remember specifically the DeSaveria family, for example. When they say it was RCA Family, they literally would hire relatives from the same family. You'd see a father working there, a mother, a cousin, an uncle, grandchildren. I mean, you literally saw generations of the same family all working there at the same time. But in later years, after we became General Electric and then later Lockheed Martin and now L3, it has become much more diverse as far as other ethnic groups working there, especially in management. That's another thing that was interesting. Back in those days, not just our company, but I think it was pretty much across the board in this country, that you basically only saw white males in senior management positions. You didn't see females as managers at all. They were basically secretaries and clerks and things like that. Today in my company, there are women in senior management positions. As a matter of fact, we just went through a reorganization in L3, and we now report to a lady out in Salt Lake City named Susan Opp, who runs the entire group of L3 Communications. So times have definitely changed, and I think for the better.
What were your working conditions like?
Well, the working conditions were fine, but the physical buildings, when I started to work there, were pretty much in a state of disrepair. And I say that because they were the same exact buildings that had been there for literally 80, 90 years. They were the original factory buildings going back to the days of Victor Talking Machine. Over the years, they had renovated the interiors of these buildings, but they still were very old buildings. And when General Electric bought us in 1986, they came up with a plan to basically move us out of that old plant and into another facility. And originally, they were going to move us out to Cherry Hill, and the city of Camden really did not want that to happen because we were one of the last companies on a major scale in the city of Camden. So the company worked a deal with the city and the state to build new buildings for us right across the street, where the old Campbell Soup canning factory was on Front and Market Streets. They had moved their operations for canning soups down to Kentucky, and they closed their factory in '91. The city took care of demolishing the buildings, and they built a brand new facility for us right across the street, 2 buildings that we're still in today. One of them is the administration and engineering building, and the other one is our factory building. So we basically went from some very antiquated, oversized, inefficient buildings in the old plant to modern, very efficient buildings where we still are today.
What was one of your most memorable experiences working at RCA?
Well, I would have to say the most memorable was the book project. My normal job was very exciting, going out and meeting new customers, bringing in business for the company, which I still do today in L3. But I would have to say that doing this book project was very eye-opening for me. Very similar to this project that you guys are doing right now with Camden High School, where you're documenting and preserving the story of this tremendous company. I started my project doing a very similar thing. Not only did I collect archival material and research on my own, but I actually sat down with literally the pioneers of the company at that time. This was 1991, and some of these men were like in their 80s and 90s, and these guys were actually the inventors of radio and television. And it was just, I was sitting there talking to legends that, were responsible for the creation of these wonderful inventions. And, so I did that. I would say, in addition to working on my own for about 7 years on the research end, I spent that last 6 months interviewing these men and documenting their stories and writing this book. And I worked on this project literally 18, 20 hours a day for 6 straight months, and then went to a local publisher, I should say a printing shop in Pennsauken, and had the book printed. And it was just so exciting to see the final product, this product right here, become a reality. So to this day, I consider that my greatest achievement with the company, and I just feel privileged that I was able to take on this project and execute it and do something that will remain long after I'm done. So,
Can you describe an average workday?
An average workday for me, because I was in the marketing group and my job was to go out and make business with new customers, I was mainly out of the office more than I was in the office. When I was in the office, I would do my reports and attend meetings and so forth, but most weeks I would be on the road at least 2-3 days out of a 5-day week. So some of my customers were in Washington, D.C., so I would drive back and forth to Washington or take a train. But some of my customers were literally all over the country, so I would be in and out of the Philadelphia airport pretty much once a week. So I did a lot of traveling in my job, which I still even do today.